Well, this was done with only 850, or no, 1,600 and 1,700 eyes looking at me at the Metropolitan Museum. And it was Marisa Tomei, and I'm sorry to say that the best part of this really occurred before this part. And it was when she stared me right in the eye and did like this with her strap and flipped it over. That finished the painting. I couldn't. So I can't be held responsible for anything that goes on here. This is also a film that was made with 2 different cameras, or 3 actually. You'll see that there isn't. You can see that she was not that color, obviously, and then there's a much cooler light on me, which is closer to the color things were, perhaps, and then another one on the palette. So try not to be too confused by this discrepancy. But anyway, you can see how things are starting, just more with the direction and the kinetic energy and placement. Mm-hmm. That's what it's all about at that point. And then a little bit of proportion starting to come in. But now you can see, so the beginning, I mean, you have to begin. You can't begin finished, so you really just start with generally a placement. Hopefully not some cliche or ordinary something or an automatic centering, or you start with something. And that's a matter of feel too. No amount of education is going to teach you how to compose, none whatsoever. It's a question of feel. If you look at the complexity of, let's say, some of Degas' dance ateliers, I mean, there's just no way that those could be done mechanically. It's a question of feel. The same is true of something very simple, like a simple Tintoretto head with a dark background, or a simple Sargent head, or even more complex Sargent portraits of one kind or another. They're done by feel. They're not done by mechanical methods. And so at any rate, and then after the placement is more or less decided upon, or at least let's just say hypothesized. So when you start, when I start anyway, I'm hypothesizing where something is to go, experimenting where something is to go, and if I don't like it, I'll just shave it down and move it over. And at this point, you can see it's extremely fluid, and I could just as easily wash half of this off and move it over, or it's just kind of like putty, and it's enormous fun to create that way. Then the next thing is to try to figure out the kind of general kinetic direction of things, the energy, which way it's going, which way. You can notice that I have a tendency to draw in straight lines too, even if something is a curve. If you look more closely, why, it's more likely you got planes, and rather than a circle. Circles are deadly. One thing that's very important in my teaching is learn to see angles, which are relative lines, the relative direction of lines. And this is what gives power and excitement to a painting. I'm not a Botero fan, frankly.
Well,
at any rate, sorry.
At this early stage, do you feel like you're thinking as much about the figure, or is it more about thrusts and directions of shapes and things like that, design?
Well, Dan's question was, am I thinking more about shapes, or am I thinking about the figure? I mean, were this to be a figure painting, let's say, or in anything, or in this specifically?
In this one specifically, yeah, because we have this in real time.
Mm-hmm. Well, you can see the extreme angle of the shoulders, and how the sternomastoid, or neck, on the left side goes up, and the relative angles. The angle of the head, you see, and you can see I've also sketched some lines across the bodice, and I don't know if that's the beginning of the clavicle on the bottom right. I got it too low if it is. But at any rate, I'm thinking that it's a figure, but at the same time I'm plotting it out. I've got both things in my head at the same time, which is not that difficult. If that makes any sense.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. I was having this discussion with my wife. She brings an Iranian proverb everywhere she goes. She was talking about certain people working with their hands, others working with their intellect, others working with their heart. And I was just curious. I've been wanting to ask you this for a while. I feel like Charlie Rose here. Do you feel like you're painting more with your intellect, with your hand, or with your heart when you're doing these? at this point in your career? And if so, when did it change for you, if you?
I think there was a time early in my career when I probably was doing some portraits that I shouldn't have been doing early on, and I think I was painting more from fear and trying to minimize embarrassment and that kind of thing. I think more when I paint now, I'm enjoying the creativity, the spontaneity, the ease. I'm aware of all that, and then there certainly is a certain confidence when things are going well, which is sometimes, and then a great love of trying to kind of go beyond, and I don't know if that's, I guess that's from the heart a great deal, because I don't know whether I more love doing it or love anticipating the result, or but an awful lot of heart is involved. Yeah. I can say that.
Makes sense.
I'd hate to see a painting in which no intellect was involved,
Right.
because I think that that's part of what we must have, or we have. I mean, Renoir in his latter years, I presume, painted largely from the heart, and I think his best paintings were early on when he had both the heart, the inspiration, and the intellect all going at once. If you look at the Diana of the Hunt in the National Gallery, there's the kind of Renoir I love to see, and then the period in the next 10 or 15 years. But then later on, why, I don't know what happened, but as I say, I'm sure he painted from the heart, but the intellect was simply gone.
Okay.
And then there, of course, a painting that is the intellect only without the heart is like a piece of ice. So that's not fun either.
Can I ask you, how would you suggest that a person who wants to get more into painting in this way, who wants to do portraiture, how should they proceed forward if they really want to get in there but they don't know how to do it?
Well, it depends, of course, on what level as a painter they may be to begin with. Do you have any thoughts on what level you're talking about?
I imagine those who maybe are a few years into the art training, they've had to do what they've had to do. They really want to paint, but maybe they're having some concerns about posing somebody from life. You know, how much can I do that? How necessary is it? Or how can I proceed down this path of portrait as fine art?
Well, the best way to become a portrait painter is to be a good painter first, and which can include painting the human head, but not as a commissioned portrait. Paint the human head as a study, as an opportunity to study the techniques of painting. And I'm a great believer that still life is certainly one of the greatest means to get to the end of learning to paint. Not that that's an end, but in that direction. But I can't emphasize enough that the basics are what make it tick. It'd be like taking the engine out of a car. You're just not going to go anywhere. And the engine is experience, and it's competence, and those are the things that drive. And anything else shows. And that's the reason so many people, sadly, revert to stylization. And like I say, if we're going to make a statement that's going to have a valid impact and actually have an opportunity to make any real change in the world today, in the art world today, we've got to simply be better. Simply be better. And I'm sure that all of you are aware that there is a certain negative connotation to the word portrait painter in conversation today, and we need to elevate that to the position where it should be, because the greatest paintings that were ever painted are probably portraits. And if you want to go through the list, why, go right ahead. But we don't want to do anything to undermine that great tradition. We want to do quite the reverse.
Could you maybe go into how a little bit of this is accomplished at Incaminati?
Well, Incaminati is an art school that's based on on teaching and hence learning the basic principles, some of which are somewhat elucidated here. Teaching people to see, opening their eyes, because we're, for the large part, walking around pretty blind. We don't think so, because we don't know what we don't know. But so ignorance is not, unfortunately, bliss, because it eventually comes to bite you. And either in pursuing a career of mediocrity or of frustration or giving up entirely or whatever. But if you're on the road of getting information and acting on it and learning, it's, I can tell you that all the people at Incaminati are pumped up. They are so excited. Every day is an adventure in learning to see better and hence work better, and their work is going up exponentially in quality. And so this is something that I think is a lot different than any other art school known to me, and something that is going to be, is broader in its concepts, but yet more finite in its ability to achieve every level. And therefore, I think it's the school that kind of has it all. And for example, I think it's really important that three of the top winners of prizes here in the last year or so at this here have been Incaminati people, and a whole bunch of others have been full-time Incaminati people, and a number of others have attended Incaminati as well, including workshops. So this is a school that's only been in existence 5 years that has arisen mercurially as I think most people would agree that really know it. It's certainly the top art school place to learn seriously how to paint, I think, in the world. But I'm a little prejudiced.
No, that's good. That's good. If I could elaborate, just being an observer coming into Incaminati, it seems to me as though there's a great emphasis on the beginning of the painting, on this vital start to things. Hence your heading a few minutes ago about the potential of the start. You know, through charcoal, through wiping out the charcoal drawings, light and shadow, and through beginning paintings like this. Yeah.
Well, Dan is totally right about that. You can't tack the shutters on the house until you have a great foundation. And that's what, if you want to make a cheap analogy, that's pretty much what a lot of painters are anxious to do. The foundation's not that important, the building, the structure, the superstructure is not that important, but boy, I can't wait to get those shutters on. And that's the reason you have failures. And it's a primitive thing to do, and it's not, simply isn't elucidated, and it's not going to get anyone anywhere. So knowing having the basics, knowing how to build that foundation, having an understanding of it, knowing how to build the superstructure, how to put the roof on it just the right way before you ever get to the shutters. The shutters are nothing. That's nothing. The polish is nothing. Highlights are nothing. The hard part is the basic, and that's what simply isn't being taught. And that's what is being taught at Incaminati, and at which school Dan is one of the great and principal teachers. We're very proud to have him there.
Thank you.
Very proud.
So you believe that there's always a question that comes up about how much of what one is doing is a gift or it's a natural facility. You believe that the vast majority of it is knowable stuff, right?
Well, all of it is knowable stuff. It all depends on who we're trying to stuff with the knowables. This brings us to a kind of an interesting question, and that is, or situation, when people apply to come to Incaminati, for example, we might have two people, let's say, equal in all facets, in all ways, except one draws rather badly, another one is a little more advanced. Which one should we have a spot for only one? How would we make the selection? The one that's more advanced, I said everything being equal, almost everything being equal, what if, for example, the person that sort of drew a little better were copying things out of Vogue magazine and practically tracing them and then carefully toning them in and putting on the eyelashes and doing all that. And someone else, the other person that might have what did not seem to be as great an aptitude. Very hard to make a decision, because it could be that the ultimate aptitude that the seemingly lesser student has might be greater than that of the one that does the more, quote, finished work and looks more. So determining what talent is and where it is and what it looks like is very easy, very difficult in someone unless they've been there a while. We've had people come to Incominati that probably didn't seem to shine exactly when they first got in, and maybe didn't do that well for, I mean, they did well, but they just didn't excel in relation to the rest of the group for a month or two or three or four or five or six, and then all of a sudden they start taking off. And everyone takes off in Incominati, because it's impossible not to learn the way the information is given and the way the practice and the intensity is presented. So. But some go faster than others. So this business of determining talent ahead of time is kind of tough. As you probably know, Dan, you do a lot of teaching.
You don't have to unlearn anything if you're showing up. And I mean,
well,
you may
that's
feel
true
like
too. I mean,
you're
if you get someone who's stubborn and they set their teeth and they say, no, I was taught you draw a nose this way, 3 lines to the left, 1 to the right, and you measure this and you do that, and they've never learned to see, but they've learned to measure. Sometimes it's very hard to remove that crutch and make them happy. So. It's pretty complicated, but the one thing is we win almost every time with the students, and they win. They're the big winners.
Let me ask you about this quote. I hope you like it, because it's yours. Attack your weaknesses. That's difficult. Creativity can present a whole spectrum of challenges, and it's so tempting to stick with familiar territory.
Well, that's sure true. I can remember a time when, at a certain age, meaning a certain young age, I saw the drawings of people that could draw a whole heck of a lot better than I could, especially the human figure, on which I had never concentrated really much, and got me a little upset. But instead of avoiding it and drawing people in togas, I decided to learn to draw the human figure. So I just attacked that, and I'm probably not the world's greatest draftsman, but I can draw a human figure about as well as anyone now. And I get great joy out of it, because it's another powerful instrument at my disposal, a great tool, and it actually becomes part of the aesthetic of my work, is the attitude and rendering of the human body and the human soul and emotion that is all attendant to it. And where would I be if I had avoided that problem rather than hit it head on? That was at age 11, I think. Go ahead.
Can I ask you a question about style? In The Art Spirit, Henry says your style is the way you talk and paint. How do you feel about that?
Well, I think that's true. Henry style is in part the way you talk in paint. And I'm not sure, bringing me to an interesting semantic point, I don't know if style is the way you scream and yell in paint. And that would go, of course, towards de Kooning and towards Twombly and some of the other things that I only respect in the sense that one should respect everything, I suppose. What was the question exactly?
It was about style.
About
Never
what?
mind. Don't worry.
No, keep going. I want to hear it.
I was just curious about, well, Henry talking about the style is the way you talk.
No, I diverted myself from my own diversion. And my first diversion, before I diverted from the diversion,
it's a dumb
was
question. Sorry.
Some of the things in Henry's Art Spirit, and it's. I happen to think that if you read that book, which has a lot of really terrific stuff in it, I think that there's way too much of a preoccupation with, quote, the brush stroke, the looseness, the brush stroke. The other day I made the comparison to the brush stroke as the typewriter. I'm not so interested in the type of the typewriter, but rather the words it says. I'm more interested in the philosophy of the novel or the information of the biography, and less interested in the type. So I'm more interested in the end than the means. Henry was more interested in the means than I am, although he did some wonderful paintings at times. But so many people get carried away with the brushstroke of John Singer Sargent. That's not the great thing about John Singer Sargent. It's the understanding of form and color. And that can be elucidated, that can be painted, and that can become masterful by painting either tightly or loosely, depending on the master.
So do you think that somebody studying should go after style explicitly, or should they go through the training and then the style is kind of a reflection of how they put the paint on canvas?
If you learn in a serious way without getting embedded in style and cliches and the technique, inevitably, if you pursue it, you will emerge. But wouldn't you rather emerge through elucidation than ignorance? There is greater similarity and less creativity attached to ignorance than there is to someone who's elucidated and learned, because you go beyond. The ignorant have something very, very much in common. They're very common in common. If you don't have enough of the basic knowledge, and the greatest paintings are rather simple. Or what about the most complex paintings is the simple elements upon which the complexity is built. These as Lincoln said, these truths are self-evident, and they must remain evident. These basic truths, they must remain evident in a painting, as they do, I think, in any element of life. These basic, simple truths, no matter how embellished or under what conditions they're presented, have to remain self-evident, or at least evident. Now what was the question again? I'm sorry, I'm a diversionary type.
No, don't worry about it. You're doing great. You're doing better than I am. I'm almost out of questions. I'm going to have to ask you about your favorite baseball team in a minute. I want to know about your favorite painters, if that's... You could talk about
wow. Of what period?
Any period.
There's something about the greatest Hellenistic sculpture that I find painterly. And I could name a number of them, but things of the period of the sort of late 3rd century and thereabouts in the Hellenistic period. I think some of the fluidity of the inner rhythms, the beautiful proportions, the idyllic proportions that were a preoccupation and a successful product of the Greek age, I find very painterly, because there is a flow to them, and I find that something very synonymous with some of the elements that I love to see in a painting, a flow, a rhythm, a reasoning, which I think is the basis of classicism, of classical art. So many people that think they're classical artists are trying to copy Greek statues, thinking that are Greek something or others, or making their things look that way. And that's not any good, folks. What we need to do is decide and figure out what it is of beauty and proportion and relevance in classical art, and incorporate it as part of our creative being, but create something that is not simply a replication of the surface of those things. We need to not go beyond, but go to our own age and get something else. I hate to think that we're living in an age which was surpassed by us 2,300 years ago. I would be very sad to think that that's the way the graph looks with us down here. And I wouldn't buy us on the stock market if that were the case. But if you don't know what came from the past, you don't really know where you are in the present. And, and so I think it's extremely important. Dan's question is a great one, because it goes to art history. And I think if you don't know art history, you don't know art today, and you don't know what artist could be tomorrow. And it's important. How many of you spent 100 hours in an art museum last year? Raise your hand. Well, not many. Not many. I'd really recommend it. I'd recommend it. Go in, absorb, stand in front of the great ones and cry. Do whatever you can, feel it, envy it, and try to emulate what there is about it that is great, not copy it. Big difference. Can do. But to understand it from your heart and your soul, and to feel its meaning and have its meaning inside of you is a profound thing. That's understanding the masters. And that's what you want people to eventually feel about your work.